abortion survivors break their silence. Dr. John Bruchalski is a former abortionist turned pro-life doctor who now runs the largest fully pro-life OBGYN in the nation. And attorney Andrew Bath is the executive vice president and general counsel of the Thomas More Society, a law firm that has represented many high-profile activists, including David Daleiden and Mark Houck, and is currently representing activists like Lauren Handy, who have been charged with freedom of access to clinic entrances charges by the DOJ. I'd now like these panelists to join me here on stage. Well, thank you all for joining us here this morning. Andrew, I think we'll get started with you. The Thomas More Society has been on the front lines of many of these stories that we've been hearing, particularly of the DC-5. Can you fill us in? What should we know about these 5 babies, and what is the current status of the investigation into their deaths?
Well, Mary Margaret, a couple of our clients went to the late-term abortion clinic in DC and happened upon the medical waste removal service truck that was there to pick up. And there was a couple boxes there that they were picking up, and they asked the driver if they could have one because they suspected what was inside was aborted babies. The driver asked, "What are you going to do with them?" "Well, we're going to give them a Christian burial." So the driver permitted them to take one of the boxes, and they went and opened it, and they found about 115 aborted babies. Most of those were early-term abortions. 5 of them were so late that you wouldn't call these fetuses. You would call these babies if you held them outside of the womb. So they took the 110 young ones, gave them to a Catholic priest who gave them a Christian burial. And they took the 5 to law enforcement, hoping there would be an investigation. Now, we can't make the District of Columbia do an investigation of these. So they held them. We sent them a letter saying we want them preserved because we have a trial coming up for Lauren Handy and some others who did an event, let's say, at this late-term abortion clinic. Now, Lauren Handy is kind of a unique person. She's very determined. She was a college student who saw an undercover video in which the abortionist at this clinic said that if a baby was born alive in an abortion, he wouldn't do anything to help it. He would let it expire. So she was so moved by that she dropped out of college and became a pro-life activist. So now she's there, and she sees this evidence that suggests to her that babies are being born alive and left to die. Because of these 5, a couple of them looked like one was very late term, maybe 30 weeks. And they looked like they had been born alive, and a couple of them looked like they had been victims of partial birth abortion, which is unlawful under federal law.
Right, and like you're saying, we do have the Born Alive Infant Survivors Protection Act and the Partial Birth Abortion Act. So if the DC medical examiner were to discover that the DC-5 were illegally aborted, what happens then?
That won't happen because we can't make the DC medical examiner do an investigation. We're going to have to do it ourselves or have Congress come in. And we've had a good response from Congress because we sent a letter to the DC medical examiner saying that we need those babies preserved for evidence at trial because Lauren Handy was arrested and now has been convicted of violating the FACE Act, F-A-C-E, Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. And we are now awaiting sentencing, and we told the medical examiner to save that for trial. The trial's happened now, and the federal government, the administration came in and told the medical examiner that they see no reason to keep these babies. So the medical examiner told us, we have a week to get a court order, otherwise they will be destroyed. We went to Congress, Congress responded. We have a letter from Senator Ted Cruz demanding that they preserve them. We have a letter from Congressman Chip Roy and Andy Biggs saying we demand you preserve them. And so now we've got these babies preserved, and we want Congress to step in and do an investigation and find out not only what happened to the 5, but also what's going on in that clinic. Because we have scholarly studies that say that if you do a late-term abortion in the manner in which they do them in the clinic, and we know that because we have the abortionist on videotape because of this undercover investigation. If you do abortions in the way they do them in this clinic, the likelihood that you'll produce a live birth is as high as 50%. And so we think that probably is why these babies, a couple of these babies, look like they probably were born alive and then left to die. So we need a forensic investigation, and we need an investigation into what's going on at that clinic.
Now, Dr. B, I would love to turn to you. Could you share your story with us? We know that you have particular insight into the story of the 5, but we'd love to hear, first of all, your story.
Sure. In my younger years, I wanted to integrate abortion into excellent medical care, OBGYN care. And I would listen to my patients who said they really needed this service, and not wanting to dump it on somebody else, I wanted to be the best I could be, not just working at an abortion clinic only, but being a part of my practice. Now, I did abortions during the first 2 years of my residency, and it was a part of excellent women's health care. This was in 87 to 89, 1989. And there I was, going back and forth, depending on patient autonomy. If it was wanted or welcomed, you did one thing. If it was not wanted, unwelcomed, you did another. And you did it across the board. So here I was at the time trying to do both, because I almost understand why men and women only do late-term abortions in these centers, because I was fracturing. It runs right through the human heart and mind, cognitive dissonance and heartful dissonance, because you had to steel yourself as the fetuses became larger and larger and more difficult to end their lives. And you begin to manipulate and you begin to use saline for death. Back then, we did saline abortions. And yet, the very next patient, we might have used a bag of normal saline to save their life. Not only is the woman in both cases caught in the middle, a war on women, but so is that second patient. I was taught to only have one patient at that time. So this began to really rip me through. And one night, in one room, we were saving a 22-weeker, and in the next room, I aborted a 22-weeker. Broke water and just delivered it forcefully with medication. That second patient, that second child, unborn, the fetus, lived. And I had to call the NICU to come and care for this child because it was over 500 grams. What did I do at that moment? I wanted to suffocate the squeaks of the child that I caught in a pail because no one wanted it. She didn't want it. I didn't want it. The hospital didn't want it. And I wasn't going to try to compound her pain by making this child cry so she would have another stimulated, remember, the body doesn't, the body keeps the score. So out of a false compassion, I put a covering over the child's head, a lap pad, we call it. We do it all the time. All the time. Because these children, in these later term abortions, after 21 weeks, 1% of all abortions are done then, 10,000 a year. We now have data from Canada and this country and some states, because the states that are highest in these, they don't want to tell us about it. And so there I was but I had to fix the head to get it to suffocate faster. And I picked it up and it was too heavy. All of a sudden the data was coming in. Abortion and breast cancer, abortion and mental illness, abortion and preterm birth. So the medical data was coming in. Viscerally, sadly, I was fracturing because I had nowhere else to go because I wanted to do this, not ideologically, but from good medicine point of view, right? We want to make it good medicine. No. And lo and behold, that's when witnesses kind of popped up, professionals, trained medical staff, and students from below, my mentors from above kind of going, hey man, you're better than this. And of course, I wasn't praying at the time, but there were probably people who were praying for me. And I opened up, and that's when switching over from abortion to life-affirming medicine became clear.
And now you run one of the largest pro-life OBGYNs in the country, right?
Yes. In Northern Virginia, we've been around so long, over 30 years now, we've seen just about every other center across the country life-affirming, whether it's body literacy and teaching women to listen to the language of their body, that you're not crazy, that you can cooperate and collaborate with each other, or perinatal hospice, where you take the womb and turn it into a hospice when you have a sick child. You don't have to eugenically end it. You don't have to seek and destroy and say, Mom, you need to shorten your time with a sick child. You help her accompany her, which is really the secret of life-affirming medicine. It's about accompaniment. And then lastly, but one of the other things we do there is we partner with all regional pregnancy resource centers, because we believe in an excellent, holistic, integrated safety net in my community, in our communities. Take responsibility for the least in your own. And that has altered the way, and now we inspire others. We've gone nonprofit. We see the underserved. It's a hybrid medical economic model, but I can go to bed at night, and so can my patients, our patients. Anybody in this audience here or on the internet, my heart breaks for all of us who know somebody or have had suffered from abortion. And there's a better way out there medically. And these centers are popping up all over, and so be it. I can't judge. I can just advocate for what has happened in my life and what has happened in the lives of my patients, many of who come in wanting an abortion because they think that's their only option, right? But I have no choice. And so, therefore, it's a way to really make a difference.
And Melissa, you also have a very emotional, inspiring story of how you came into this world. Can you share with us the story of how your biological mother attempted to abort you as an unborn baby?
Yeah, Dr. Bruchalski's testimony always touches me in a huge way. He is someone who means a lot to me. And I want people here in this room or even online to understand what you're looking at when I reach over and grab Dr. B's hand. He ended the lives of children just like me. And yet I have the great opportunity here to sit with him today and say, this is what redemption looks like, right? This is what restoration looks like. This conversion is possible for people. If we believe in that, then we live this out. And his story and mine are so similar yet so very different. My birth mother was someone who Dr. B could have seen back in 1977. I am a survivor who was ultimately placed for adoption, but my birth mother faced an unplanned pregnancy with me. And just as Dr. Bruchalski was talking about saline infusion abortions, that is the procedure that my birth mother underwent. I now know it was forced upon her against her will. That procedure lasted actually 5 days. We know that through my medical records. It typically lasted about 3 days. But in my circumstances, they just could not successfully induce her labor. And I'm sure if Dr. B would have been that abortionist, he would have started to suspect that not only was the abortion going to be successful, that was the intention, but you likely would have suspected that my birth mother was going to lose her life in that abortion.
The risks were increasing as the minutes ticked.
So over a 5-day period, they kept trying to induce her labor until on the 5th day they were ultimately successful. I ended up being born alive in the final step of that abortion procedure at St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa. And I wish I could sit here today and say when I was accidentally born alive, all the medical professionals saw my inherent dignity and value. But just like Dr. B has talked about, this is a complication that the abortion industry dreads. We are called the dreaded complication of abortion, those of us that survive abortion procedures. And I now know that I was initially laid aside, not immediately provided medical care. I know from nurses at that hospital, ultimately children like me usually landed in a utility closet, placed in buckets of formaldehyde to be left to die. In my circumstances, a brave nurse defied the orders to leave me to die, and ultimately I wound up in the NICU. I was not 18 to 20 weeks gestationally like was written on my medical records. I weighed 2 pounds, 14 ounces. And a neonatologist remarked in my records, he estimated my birth mother was probably about 31 weeks pregnant with me. So when we hear this discussion in our society about abortion as a choice and a right or as health care, or that discussion that late-term abortions don't happen, the reality is people like me are living testament to the fact that it happens. And that, Dr. B, you know this, abortionists don't often provide adequate exams to know how far along a woman even is.
Because the child and the whole issue is not wanted. You cut corners. You will leave it up to somebody else to make that decision. Mm-hmm. The child that lived with me, I didn't do a good enough history. But it's it's a double shame, because I thought I was a good doctor. One with shame was, it came out alive. The second shame was, if I really come to think about it, I didn't really give a damn about this woman. I didn't even do a good history.
Now, Melissa, you do really, really important work with abortion survivors now, and we know you've written a book on this as well. Can you share with us why you wrote this book, Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, and what have you learned from these hundreds of abortion survivors that you speak with?
Most survivors feel like we're the only person that this happened to, and frankly, looking around the media, around our culture, even on the Hill, you would be led to believe that you're the only person that this happened to. It is, just as Dr. B is talking about shame, that is so much what survivors and even women who undergo abortions that fail or they stop them or reverse them, right? Women feel this shame, this embarrassment, this isolation. And really that is part of my challenge to our abortion-heavy media and culture and policymakers is stop inducing shame upon people like me. We have gone through enough, right? Acknowledge that this happens, help support us, help families find healing after this happens. But, for me, I got involved in the pro-life movement about 17 years ago. Back then, didn't know of a lot of people like me, but got involved in the pro-life movement, and it changed my life. And everywhere I went, I would hear a story like mine. They tend to be whispers. And the whispers kept getting louder and louder. And so over the years, I started to help survivors any way that I could, share their story, come on the Hill, testify before policy. But all the while had been praying and saying, Lord, somebody's got to do something to help people like me who need intense healing, because we have these deep wounds. Our body keeps the score. All of these pieces, I look healthy to everyone else, but I can tell you I have my own distinct issues, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and some physical things that I know are as a result of the stress of the abortion procedure and then being in the NICU. So, I prayed that somebody would come along, and it took me really until about 2019 to realize I was the person that had been called to that place. So, we know that abortion survivors are happening day in and day out, and not just late term, but we have babies who survive both chemical abortion pills early on in the pregnancy, right? We know babies who survive successful reversals. So when we know that this is happening time and time again, we know that we need to do more to give them a voice. That's what the book was about, right? We don't need to suffer in silence. Women who undergo this deserve to have a voice as well. I share some of those stories in my book, including a woman who stopped her late-term abortion and is raising her little girl who is now about 12 years old. So we need to give them a voice, we need to educate, and we need to advocate, because this is an issue that we are still facing.
And with that context, we know that these abortions are happening. We know babies are being born alive through botched abortions and allowed to die. Andrew, can you give us some context on the laws that we have to protect babies and why they aren't being enforced?
Well, we have, there's a number of laws. There's laws against child abuse. There's the Abortion Born Alive Protection Act, which is a federal law that says that babies born alive during botched abortions are persons under the law. Now we have the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act that's introduced in Congress, and we can't get it through Congress. That law has teeth, whereas the other law doesn't. So that law would require doctors to provide care to babies born alive during abortions to the same degree they would give care to a baby born prematurely who was wanted. And last year, this law in various forms is introduced time and time again and doesn't get through Congress. Last year, all but 3 Democrats voted against this law. So, so these babies are being left to die. This is what motivated our client Lauren Handy to enter the pro-life movement, drop out of college. And this is something that Congress needs to investigate what's going on, producing these babies born alive during abortions. We need to prohibit the abortion procedures that are likely to produce these babies. And of course, that triggers the question in your mind, if we're going to prohibit the procedures that are likely to produce live babies during abortion procedures, why don't we care about the other babies?
What are we doing?
Yes, this is a good versus evil struggle, and we need prayer support, and we need Congress to act.
So it sounds like you're saying there's a lot of babies that may be being allowed to die that we don't know about.
Well, according to the literature, on late-term abortions, up to 50% could be born alive. Their survival time can be hours.
Dr. Bree, can you elaborate for us? Why would we be told by media, activists, and lawmakers that this isn't happening when we know that, in fact, it is?
The reality is, from my perspective, is that this is ideologically driven. This is not medically driven. This is abortion on demand. And the same ethics we use to end the life in utero, we're now allowing the born fetus or the unborn child becoming born. Why does the American College of OBGYN, the almost political action committee for the abortion wing of this world, rather than a professional organization, they've never supported common sense laws or concern about the abortion procedure. Never. They've never sided on that side. It's always been abortion on demand for any reason at any time. And so what happens is that they use language to continually keep the process, because abortion on demand is what they have to defend. And so therefore, they won't say late-term abortion. That's too, it creates too much animosity. And so they say, oh, 21 weeks. We have no idea because they're not studied. The data's not out there. We have no idea how many. And this whole idea of born alive as this incredible shame and mistake, what do we call it? No. It's between a doctor, his one patient, and their family. Because the folks in that room who have gotten the woman to the late-term abortion, when that child comes out, it's still not wanted. So once again, they close off that room and allow those 3 people, the doc who was a part of it, the woman who was sometimes coerced into it, and then the family who is ashamed by this, or we can't take care of this. That's what happens. It's hubris. It's not humility. Real physicians listen to their patients, advise what is in the best interest of two patients. I will accompany you through this. We will always hate disease, but we will always love our patients. It becomes more than just a widget in an ideology. Medicine is based on values and virtues. We just have to help the present day remember what are the foundations for excellent health care and continue to say it over and over and over again. And so it's the language, it's the ability to realize that this is a mistake. And that's the reason why I think the abortion medical complex industry, if you want to use that, like big pharma or big non-pharma, they have a stake in this because it's ideological. Might makes right. And if you only believe in a war on women to the only one patient and neglect all the women that you've aborted, makes no sense. We've gone crazy. This is crazy.
Now, Melissa, based on your experience with abortion survivors, and not only the survivors, but the mothers who tried to abort their babies that you've spoken with and provided compassionate care for, what do you think is going through their heads as they deal with abortion regret and these survivors? How are they reacting to stories like the 5?
It is very traumatic to not even be on social media and be safe from discussion of abortion. Think about that for a minute, right? We serve children who survive abortion. So some babies are in the womb right now who survived the first attempt to abort them. And we know that they are still at risk of being aborted again because we know the treatment for a failed abortion is another abortion, by and large, unless you've got a Dr. B in your corner. And that's part of what we need to do is reach medical providers and have these informed conversations about the hope that comes even after an abortion has failed or a woman has stopped it or reversed it, right? There is hope in lives like mine. But, you know, the women who are experiencing this, and we've served 32 in the last year alone, not even directly marketing to them. We've strategically shifted now, knowing that we want to reach them to intervene. But that's one of the big questions women will have is, what have I done? Should I just go ahead and have another abortion because that's what I'm being told I should do? There is no hope for this baby. And what they are looking for is hope. Yes. They're looking for support. They're looking for someone to help navigate the journey with them, because if they call Planned Parenthood, they're going to get another abortion. That's it.
And they're going to be shamed into moving in that direction.
Exactly. And so our social workers are there for long-term support to help with case management, navigate whatever the crisis was that was leading to the abortion in the first place. But really, so much of our work is on helping that woman deal with the guilt and the shame that does not end even after the baby is born. We have so many moms who will say, you know what, I gave birth even after a successful abortion pill reversal, and I thought I was fine. And then I came face to face with the baby that I attempted to abort, and it's all coming back to me. So I want us, even in the movement, to understand that we need to sow these seeds long term. And I know this is our heart. This is who we are. This is what we do. But even for women like my birth mom, this is long-term care and support that the women need, the men, the survivors, and the family. And again, we don't need to feel ashamed for the fact that this happens and that there is an impact. The solution is not for another abortion or to say that abortion is the solution. The solution is to say, abortions fail, you can stop them, you can reverse them, and we are going to serve you long-term in that. Because part of what we work on as well is the parent bonding and attachment that can get interrupted and impacted when an attempted abortion has taken place. So we serve those moms and even adoptive parents so they can navigate how to have these conversations, and we don't live with a shame and silence that then continues to grow for generations.
Right. You know, I think a very important part of this conversation, as I mentioned at the beginning, is the believability factor. So not everyone believes this is happening, and we know this is perpetrated by media, lawmakers. But I would specifically like to address, Andrew, if you would, the role that the Biden administration's weaponization of the FACE Act has played in all of this, and what you think is going on with the DC authorities' attempt to get rid of these babies' bodies in this moment in time?
Okay, the FACE Act was passed in response to a number of movements within the pro-life movement. When Roe versus Wade was decided in 1973, the pro-life movement kind of was finding its way through the 70s and the 80s. So we had a couple decades where there were firebombings of clinics, it evolved into sit-ins, and you know, in the late 80s, they grew larger and larger. In the early 90s, we had the Summer of Mercy in Wichita, Kansas at George Tiller's late-term abortion clinic, where hundreds of people would show up every day. Dozens got arrested. They were charged with trespass, cycled out, came back the next day, did the same thing. The clinics were shut down temporarily. And then in 92, it shifted to other cities and got bigger. In Milwaukee, there were thousands that showed up. Hundreds got arrested every day. They were very public about what they were doing. In 93, we had George Tiller shot in the arm in Wichita. We had Dr. David Gunn shot to death in Florida. And Teddy Kennedy introduced the FACE Act in the Senate, George Schumer, the companion bill in the House, and now we have the FACE Act, which prohibits force, threats of force, or physical obstruction to inhibit anybody providing or receiving reproductive health services. Okay, so we have this law. Now, Lauren Handy saw this undercover video of the abortionist describing delivering a live baby and saying he wouldn't help it. And so she was motivated to drop out of college and do this. So we have her convicted in DC of violating the FACE Act, force, threats of force, physical obstruction. She didn't do any of that. She went into the clinic and tried to offer support to the desperate women who are seeking abortion. And we know that the vast majority of women who seek abortion are desperate. They're doing it because they think they're cornered. They have no resources. They have no options. And so we need to get the FACE Act tossed out. Now, we have some champions in Congress. Congressman Chip Roy has introduced a bill to repeal the FACE Act. Senator Mike Lee introduced the companion bill. Under this administration, that's probably not going anywhere. So we are going to use the conviction of Lauren Handy as a vehicle to challenge the constitutionality of the FACE Act. Now, under our constitutional scheme of separation of powers, the powers known as the police powers are generally left to the states. That means if you're tried for murder, rape, robbery, assault, and battery, you're probably going to be tried in state court under state laws. Now, there are some exceptions. If you commit the crime on federal property, that's different. But that's our constitutional scheme of separation of powers. So you might ask yourself, okay, force, threats of force, physical obstruction on private property at abortion clinics, where does the federal government get off thinking they can regulate this? Okay, well, Congress had to grapple with that. And in the FACE Act itself, they claim power under the 14th Amendment and the Commerce Clause to regulate in this area. Okay, the 14th Amendment, where did that come from? Roe versus Wade. Dobbs overturned Roe versus Wade. The 14th Amendment is gone. So now the FACE Act is dangling by the thin thread of the Commerce Clause. The FACE Act was passed in 1994. Since then, the Supreme Court's jurisprudence on the Commerce Clause has been much more fully developed. In the very next year, in 1995, the Supreme Court decided U.S. versus Lopez, in which the Supreme Court said that Congress did not have the power under the Commerce Clause to prohibit somebody from possessing a handgun in a school zone. That's not commerce. Okay, then in 2012, the Supreme Court decided NFIB versus Sebelius, which was the main challenge to Obamacare, in which the Supreme Court says the Commerce Clause does not give Congress the power to require everyone to purchase health insurance. So we think the Supreme Court has now developed its Commerce Clause jurisprudence to the point where we can take a challenge to the constitutionality of the FACE Act to the Supreme Court and have it tossed out. We're on layers of injustice here. It's an injustice that Lauren Handy, who was motivated to go into the clinic to educate women, to offer support to women who are thinking about abortion, did not use force, threats of force, or obstruction. She's convicted. Then they paired the FACE Act with what is known as the first KKK Act, Conspiracy Against Rights, a federal statute that was passed in 1870 to get the Ku Klux Klan. So this Biden Justice Department has changed course. In the past, there's a general conspiracy statute that is the one that should be used together with the FACE Act, that says that a conviction for conspiring to violate a law can carry no greater penalty than actually violating the law. That's not true here. So we have people that, on the first nonviolent offense under the FACE Act is a misdemeanor that carries up to 6 months in jail. But since they're charging them also with conspiracy under the first KKK Act, that transmogrifies that from a misdemeanor to a felony, and now the penalty is up to 10 years. So this is just layers of injustice. She didn't do what the FACE Act prohibits. She shouldn't be charged under this Conspiracy Act. And for crying out loud, it's unconstitutional anyway.
And I think it's important to add that the FACE Act also protects houses of worship, right? And pregnancy centers. If they are attacked or if you try to impede reproductive health services from happening at a pregnancy center, you could be charged with the FACE Act theoretically. And the Biden Justice Department, unfortunately, has only charged, I believe, 5 people in the hundreds of attacks that have taken place since the Dobbs leak by pro-abortion vandals on pro-life pregnancy centers, and 0 people for attacking Catholic churches in that same number of hundreds of attacks. But I wanted to give our audience a chance to ask some questions here today. We have some mic runners. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. And if no one here does, we will have some, I believe, our virtual viewers. Yes, over here.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask about the conspiracy of rights charge. So if abortion is not a right, how are they being charged under that?
Well, Congress claims that it has a right to legislate in this area because of the 14th Amendment and the Commerce Clause. The 14th Amendment is gone because of Dobbs, so now we have the Commerce Clause, and we have to challenge the constitutionality of that and limit Congress's ability to regulate in this area. This is really big. Lauren Handy is our client. We are her champion. We're going to come in here and say, you can't do this to our people. So Lauren Handy's freedom is at stake here, but there's more at stake. What's bigger is our whole system of citizen self-government and separation of powers under the Constitution. Congress does not have the right to regulate in this area, and we have to limit this overreach of government, this egregious abuse of government power. And we're here to do that. Now, the Thomas More Society is a nonprofit law firm that we stake out territory when it comes to life, family, and religious liberty. Most of our work is pro-life work. We've pretty much become the go-to law firm for the pro-life movement. And we don't lose sight of the fact that we're not only coming in as the champion for an individual whose rights are being abridged, but also for a whole system of citizen self-government and constitutional separation of powers. This is a big issue, and I'm very glad that Mary Margaret has brought this panel together to discuss it.
Great. Any other questions? Well, if we don't have any more from the audience, I have a few more for you. Melissa, this is on the Abortion Survivors Network. Some of the women whose stories you shared in the book had experienced abortion themselves. How does their unique perspective influence this whole conversation?
When the abortion industry and the media and abortion policymakers deny the existence of survivors, what they are doing is also denying the experiences of the women who undergo those procedures. And I want them to have to start reconciling themselves with that, because if they want to say believe all women, trust all women, what they are continuing to do is only believe, trust, and support and allow space for the voices that are consistent with the narrative that abortion is somehow a choice, a right, all of those things. So the voices of women behind survivors are so very, very important. And I mean, think about this, again, as we talk about shame, right? It's the shame of the abortion, the shock of an abortion not working, and the shame that comes from that, right? Women are looking around and saying, well, I must be the only person that this happened to. I most certainly can't ever tell anybody about it. And nobody wants to hear from me when you look at our culture. And so, right, the shame keeps piling on. And so it is so important that we acknowledge that behind survivors are the women who experienced this in the first place. And really, that has been sort of a missing link in pro-life discussion, even up until now. Survivors have been very much unquantifiable in many ways, except for the handful of us that are public with our stories. And so if we're unquantifiable, the mothers behind us have been unquantifiable as well. So this is, I think, an incredible opportunity we're stepping into post-Roe to hear the voices of those who have continuously been swept under the rug. And so, you know, I'm excited about some of the things you're going to see us doing at the Abortion Survivors Network. We launched a first ever awareness month this past September that babies survive abortions. We'll continue to do that, but we need to take that and essentially put it on steroids in today's culture, right? And tell the stories through the women when we can and adoptive families, and then the lives of survivors. You know, one of my favorite survivors is about 12 years old right now, and she survived a late-term abortion in Serbia before she was ultimately adopted. And I can tell you how important it is for these young survivors to see stories like theirs. I have the opportunity to meet them on a consistent basis. And, you know, this one little survivor, Milena, if you're watching later, hi. She tends to watch and send me letters. And this is what empowerment for these survivors looks like, is to be able to see someone else like them, know they're not alone, and then have this community of survivors from around the world who is going to be there with them for the rest of their lives in some way, shape, or form. And this is what the abortion industry is scared of. Why are they scared of survivors? Why are they scared of the women's voices being raised? Why are they scared of young survivors being supported and someday having a voice? I think we know the answer.
I think we do too. And Dr. B, I wanted to close with you asking you, and we'll get to final remarks after this, but I wanted to ask you, Dr. Santangelo is the abortionist who is based out of Foggy Bottom. He runs Washington Surgery Clinic, which is where Lauren Handy and Teresa Bukovinak with the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising found these babies. If you had an opportunity to sit down with Dr. Santangelo, in light of your past and your knowledge of what we are going through right now, what would you say to Dr. Santangelo?
I would tell him that I have been on your side of this issue, and I can understand what you're trying to do. But do you ever wake up one day and think that you're in a house of horrors? Do you ever wake up one day when you know you want to stop pitting women against their unborn children? Is there a way that you can see that excellent medicine, this become part of the perinatal revolution, rather than choosing death, violence, and hatred? Stop seeing children as sexually transmitted diseases that need to be eradicated. There's a healthier way for you and for all of us practitioners. Medicine is fractured right now. Mis and disinformation, it's a projection constantly put on people like ourselves, whether you're patients or physicians who've been on that one side and now you're on this side. And that's projection. They project everything that's inside them to us. I would say to him, there's a better way. You can actually care for two patients and bring healing and hope, never doing harm. You don't get rid of people with diseases when you're trying to target disease. You don't cure poverty by getting rid of poor people. You don't cure Down syndrome by getting rid of children with Downs. There's a better way. Join the perinatal revolution. And maybe you don't have to medicate so much. Maybe, stop being on the walkway where you are choosing who lives and who dies. Because just because of a turn of the wrist, as I've learned in medicine as well as in history, it didn't work out very well for Germany and Russia and China and the United States. We don't trust medicine anymore. You're not made as a physician to constantly decide who lives and who dies. Medicine is better than that. And it's actually more healing than that. And if you just want to lean into it a little bit and have a conversation over coffee or whatever beverages of his choice, there's no judgment on my side. I just need to advocate for the peace and the joy that I have found practicing excellent medicine. Back when I started, San Angelo, back when you started, diabetes was a death threat. 1 in 1,000 women died, and 1 in 100 babies died of stillbirth because sugars. Remember, for 5 decades of Roe, we've had 5 decades of medical science. Surgery, medicine, research, genetics, epigenetics. The explosion has occurred. We can care for both now very well. And we don't ever have to get rid of diseases by getting rid of people with those diseases. And that's what I would say.
Well, thank you. That's so beautiful, and I hope you get the opportunity to sit down with him. I hope he sees this.
I would look forward to it, because everybody deserves better. And I just really believe that he doesn't understand fully. Maybe he was injured. Maybe he was wounded at some point. Because you can't stand and sit in that industry over and over and over again and only do that. That's really, your heart hardens, your neck gets stiffened, and you suffer. And I'm sure that if we could just share our stories, maybe, who knows?
Well, that's why we're here, right? To share these
Yes.
stories. Melissa, any closing thoughts from you?
Well, first of all, thank you for hosting this today. I think it's an important conversation always, but certainly heading into this particular year. It's really important that we share stories that are often in the background when it comes to abortion. It's really important that we educate and we advocate time and time again. But if there is someone either here in person or online who has been impacted by a failed, stopped, or reversed abortion, whether you're the mom, the family member, the survivor, just know that the Abortion Survivors Network is here for you. You can reach us at info@abortionsurvivors.org. If you're a pregnancy center or an adoption agency and need training on how to talk to women about the experience that they're going through in a failed or stopped, reversed abortion, that's also what we're here for. And if there are policymakers who are tuning in, I want policymakers to know this is still of utmost importance. Not only the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, but also we need to do more to be getting the information about how often abortions are failing or women are stopping them or reversing them. We don't collect the data. And if we don't collect the data, then we don't know the numbers and we don't know how to help people like me and my birth mother.
Andrew, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I have some closing thoughts. We've represented Lauren Handy, and it's important to note that she is not a solo player. After Dobbs, everybody was grabbing at the Biden administration saying, do something, do something. And so there's a wave of these FACE Act prosecutions. Lauren is just one of those people who was caught up in this wave. You probably followed the Mark Houck case. That was the first one to go to trial. Mark Houck didn't even come close to violating the FACE Act, but the the persecution of Mark Houck was intended to be a statement made by the Biden administration to the entire country, the entire pro-life movement. And their statement is, if you go to the clinics, go to the sidewalks, even if you do nothing wrong, you are at risk, because we are going to amass the power of the entire federal government and come down on you like a ton of bricks. And that was the statement. We are a national pro-life law firm. All the national pro-life organizations were telling us that everybody noticed this. We're having trouble getting people to go to the sidewalks. So we had to make a statement of our own. And so now we've acquitted Mark Houck. We're going to take Lauren's appeal to the Supreme Court, we hope, and have the FACE Act declared unconstitutional. And our statement back to the pro-life world is that, not that you have to be afraid to go to the clinics, but our statement is, if they try to do to you what they did to Mark Houck and Lauren Handy, the Thomas More Society is going to be there for you. We will have your back. We will see that your rights are vindicated. Go to the sidewalks, offer help to desperate women, and save babies, and we are there for you. So our message is, be not afraid. You can continue your pro-life work, and we will be there for you.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you for all that you do. And Dr. B, you want to close us out with any concluding remarks?
I would like to just speak to, for any students out there, whether they're physicians or midwives, PAs or nurse practitioners, nursing students, if you feel you're being pressured to turn away from a dream of yours in healthcare, contact us at info@divinemercycare.org. If you're a physician and you've suffered some of the things we have talked about up here, contact us at info@divinemercycare.org. There's some great resources above us. Catholic Medical Association, Christian Medical and Dental, the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs. There is real help and encouragement, and from our end, accompaniment out there for you. And even if you disagree on this topic, which I understand, contact us also at info@divinemercycare.org, especially for the medical community, because that's really a major piece in the pro-life movement that we just assumed. But we've kept our mouth quiet because of the examples that were being made, because of these failed terminations. When we really begin to question, what are we doing? And the reality is, you can realize that even in the most difficult circumstances, you can find friends and real acquaintances. And there's a better way out there than just living with that pain, the abandonment, the shame, as well as the confusion. So thank you so much for bringing us together, for Melissa bringing us together.
No, thank you all for joining us, and we're so grateful for your insight and your fight for the dignity of life and all the distinct and unique ways that you do. So thank you, and I'd like everyone to join me in thanking our panelists.